Hello, and welcome to Most Writers Are Fans, the podcast that explores the intersection between writing and fandom. My name is Terry Bartley, and I'm your host. So it's going to be a great episode. I had a chance to talk to Josh Trujillo. He's a comic book writer. He's currently writing Blue Beetle, but he also has written a lot of amazing things. He did the Adventure Time comic, and he did a Bunker feature in the Christmas comic that came out this past holiday season, which meant a lot to me. I'm a big fan of Bunker, who's like a super obscure Teen Titans character, and we connected on that a good bit during the interview. So I thought, since I talked to Josh, and he's the writer of Blue Beetle, and I've been a big fan of Jaime, the current Blue Beetle, for a very long time now. I thought it would be a cool chance to talk a little bit about like my love of obscure characters. Like, if anybody asked me my favorite comic book character, I would probably list about 5 characters that they have no idea who any of them are. That's just sort of how I've always operated. And I think there's something about these characters that sort of have always stuck out in my head, and I've used that whenever I write my characters. So, sort of like sticking with Jaime, just to kind of like tie it into the interview, I started reading him whenever he debuted. Like, he debuted in 52, this like weekly comic that came out this one year from DC, and he was like this sort of like brand new set of heroes. There was like a series of heroes that came out in 52 that were like sort of like new legacy characters. So like Batwoman came out then, Kate Kane, The Question, the Renee Montoya version of The Question happened during 52, and then Jaime also happened, who was the new incarnation of Blue Beetle. And I think that part of that is why Jaime's always stuck with me, because I was there in his inception, and I think that sort of like being there for part of that was cool, and he felt like a friend. So every time he would be thrown into like another comic, like, oh, he's in Teen Titans this for a few months, so I'm going to pick that up because I love Jaime. Oh, he has a solo comic that's going to last for 6 issues. It's a mini series. I'm going to read that because I love him so much. I think that it was sort of like a sense of camaraderie that I had with him, which sounds silly, but it's true with comic book characters. It's like a thing that happens. And I think that's part of why I loved him so much. But also I think there's a lot of things that I've taken away from that, which is like, another reason I love Jaime so much is because he is a very relatable character. And this is a thing that I think happened a lot in the early 2000s, whenever they made a lot of these characters. Like Miles happened then, Ms. Marvel happened shortly after that. And a lot of these characters, they sort of like made far more reflective of the world around them. So Jaime felt very much like a normal kid. And I think that I related to that, as I was like in college at the time. It was like early college. And the things that I was going through was not all that dissimilar from the things that he was going through. And so I've really taken that to heart whenever I write my characters. I always like to tell people that whenever I write my characters, you know, they say the write what you know thing. They always say like you need to write things that you know about. Sometimes I think that people take that too far. I think that the way that I interpret it is whenever I write a character, you know, they always say the characters are like, they're all different parts of yourself. I treat that literally. I always try to find a piece of a character that I can relate to that's like really important. It's like something that's an important part of my character, I try to put into their character so that I know that at least that one aspect of them is going to ring true. And sometimes it happens without me even trying. I mean, there's a character in my upcoming novel named Celeste Magister. She is a magical researcher, and she's very, like, studious. And I've never really thought of myself that way, right? Like, I've talked about having ADHD pretty openly on this podcast. I talk about how my attention sort of, like, jumps around. I rarely ever focus on any one thing. That's always been true. So whenever I write Celeste, like, I try to write somebody who feels very unlike me. But then every now and again, things would creep up that feel similar to me that just made sense to write. And I never really quite understood why, because I didn't really think of myself in the way that I think about Celeste. This like really organized, really put together, really sort of like obsessive about the things that she cares about, issues. And then about a few months ago, I got diagnosed with ADHD. And then about a few months ago, it became pretty clear based on a number of symptoms that had kind of like emerged, because I talked about how it was kind of stressful whenever I came back from tour. A number of symptoms had cropped up that made it pretty evident that I had some level of OCD. Spoke to my therapist. He checked out, like, yes, some kind of OCD is here. I don't know exactly what yet. We've not fully diagnosed it, but we know that I have some level of OCD. And it just became so clear to me that that is the thing in Celeste that I put in her that I didn't even intentionally put into her. Which I think maybe negates the point I made now that I think about it. Because, you know, I didn't intentionally put that in her. But I think that whenever you're a writer, I think that a lot of times that stuff just kind of like happens, you know? I think that a lot of times whenever you are writing a character, you just sort of put a part of yourself in there without even trying, you know? And I think this is a part of myself that I didn't even see, that I put into her, that sort of like was my way in. And I didn't see it coming. It was a bit of a surprise. But I think that it is just something to keep in mind. Like whenever you write these characters, like oftentimes the thing that connects with you is something that you might not even realize. And honestly, when I stop and think about it, that's true with a lot of these obscure characters that I love in comics. And I know that because I've interviewed a number of the writers of those characters. So as a quick example, I was a really big fan of the Stephanie Brown Batgirl run. It was like a solid 24 issues for 2 straight years where we saw Stephanie Brown, who's like, she was, spoiler, she's like a Batman sidekick, though it's always been a little bit in the background. She became Batgirl, and she had a solo comic where she was Batgirl, and I really related to it. It really was resonant with me because there was a lot of sense of like hope and striving for something more. And I had the chance to interview the writer of that run, Brian Q. Miller, on a previous podcast. And I think that ultimately what I realize now in hindsight is that there was just like a lot of similarities between he and I. And that's what made Stephanie connect with me, because he put a lot of himself into her. So I guess what I'm really saying, and guys, thank you so much for joining me on this therapy session that I basically had out loud with myself, is that you don't need to overthink your characters whenever you write them, because you're going to instinctively put a bit of yourself into them. So like as long as you write the story and you have a good sense of who those characters are, you're going to be injecting pieces of yourself. And the thing that's cool about that I have realized, is that people that are like you, because there are people like you out there. You may think that you're a unique unicorn that no one else is like, but there are people like you out there. And those people need to read characters like them because it helps them feel seen and feel like they're part of the world. And honestly, that's what representation really is, right? Like I've heard a lot of people talk about influencers and how whenever you create content, one of the best things you can do is create it so niche that, is to create a niche that's so specific, so like so specific to you, that the only people that would like it are the people that are like just like you. Because the more of yourself you put into something, the more of yourself that you kind of like niche down to, the more likely you are to be unique. Because, you know, we're all unique people. But the thing is, there are people like us, but they don't always have content made for them. And, you know, I've talked a lot about how that's the kind of thing I want to do with my book, right? Like I want people to see themselves in my characters, and I want people like me to have a book that they can read and love. So, you know, if you're a queer person with aspirations of grandeur, but you're also a bit insecure and you kind of question everything, but then you're also like really passionate and you love the thing you do, then maybe my books are for you, because all of those things are present in my characters at different levels. So like I said, we have a great episode coming up. I interview Josh Trujillo and we talk about his run on Blue Beetle and his journey to get into comics. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Most Writers Are Fans. My name is Terry Bartley, and I'm joined by Josh Trujillo. He is a comic book writer, currently writing, or did it just end Blue Beetle graduation day?
We finished graduation day, but the new series launches on Tuesday, actually. We have a new #1 issue.
Very exciting.
We're an ongoing series now.
Love it. It really was a graduation.
Yeah, actually, I like that.
So let's just go back to the beginning. I obviously want to talk everything DC because I think that we're both really big nerds. I want to get into that. Also, let's talk about like how you get into writing to begin with.
As long as I can remember, comics and animation and video games have kind of always been like a huge interest of mine. Like my grandparents would read me the Sunday Funnies out of the newspaper when I was like a baby. And so from that, I would start to trace over like Garfield strips and rearrange the panels to make my own stories. And so it's kind of always been like, I've always been bitten by the bug, I guess. And so that led into me drawing comedy and like funny animal comics. And I kind of did that all through the end of high school, but it's always been a big passion. And I didn't really know how to do that professionally. I went to school for journalism for like a minute. And then I ended up getting thrown into the working world. So I waited tables. I worked as a bartender. I worked at Disneyland for a while. I did all sorts of odd jobs. and I was just kind of dissatisfied with where I was in life. And then from there, I got a couple of comic book internships where I kind of had to pretend I was still going to school, but don't tell them that. And so I could learn how to actually make a comic book. Like I knew how to read comic books. I thought I knew how to write comic books, but like there's so many more steps involved than just that. And so like how to find artists, how to print the book, who to send it to, how to sell it, all these things. And so it wasn't until maybe like 8 years ago, story in a comic called The Reason for Dragons by Chris Northrup and Jeff Stokely. And then it turned into a 2-page audition for the Adventure Time comics, which somehow turned into 3 graphic novels. So I went from 0 to 60. I had to write 3 graphic novels in 2 months, I think it was. So that's about 400 pages of comics right there. So it's a real crash course. And then that kind of got me into the world I am in now, where I kind of balance out video games. I work for Gearbox Entertainment on some unannounced projects. And then my night job is the funny books. And, I wouldn't have it any other way. Comics are so central to me, and like I just have a real passion for them.
So just to sort of start out, so for you, like it's always sort of been comics. It sounds like comics has always been your passion, and writing for comics has been like the thing you've always wanted to do. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like it's really relatable to job to job because I've done a ton of that. Only within the past like 5 years do I feel like I've landed in a place where I feel like writing is the thing that I'm like meant to do and like the thing that I'm pursuing actively. But I feel like I always never knew what I wanted to do until like I found it. So what was that experience like for you? Like kind of like trying to figure out the path into this?
Word up to me, I'd go straight out of high school writing Superman comics or whatever. Life has different plans for you. And so I just spent kind of years like following my favorite writers on social media or listening to podcast interviews with them and just figuring out how I could get closer to that world, going to conventions and all that stuff. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Some people are fortunate enough to kind of break in quickly, but that's never been the experience for me.
Yeah. So what was it? So, I mean, I feel like probably recently for you, it's been interesting to write characters that you could personally identify with. Like Jaime is like a Latinx character, right? You're obviously more of a Latinx person. You've gotten to write some gay characters also, right? What has that been like getting to kind of like, because first of all, comics has not been the most inclusive place character-wise, right? So it's probably cool for you to get to sort of like dig your hands into the place where it makes it more inclusive.
When I started doing comics or wanting to do comics, there weren't gay characters in mainstream comics. Hulkling and Wiccan hadn't even come out yet. I think in their first appearance, they're not even out. I think it's like issues 2 or 3 or later in the arc. But, I got a lot of advice from creators, and some of that advice was like, don't write about the gay stuff. You're not going to be able to sell books that way. Stuff like that. Now like I'm able to write Blue Beetle. I get to do stuff like Captain America, Aaron Fisher, or Hulkling and Wiccan, or some other Pool Boys, a lot of queer comics. And that's really been like a big cornerstone of my career. But, it took a lot of other creators to kind of break through and like establish like the new kind of diversity we have in the industry. And so like, it's just been amazing in my lifetime. Now it's like incredible just to see how far it's changed, but also there's a lot more room to grow in the inclusion department.
Yeah. Do you have ideas for characters you want to add, whether it's like to create in like Jaime's world that could be a bit more queer inclusive, or like original characters you want to add, like ideas down the road that you'd like to throw into the DC or the Marvel universes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In Blue Beetle, Jaime is not queer. We meet his tias, Gloria and Marisol, who are a lesbian couple. We have another queer character who's been in the, hiding in plain sight for a minute. And hopefully I just keep populating that world, with different characters. We have our yellow beetle dynastis, Xiomara Arazo. She's from El Salvador. As much as I've been able to find, she's the only superhero that's ever come from El Salvador. And that's actually been a big point of pride from American El Salvadorians. Yeah,
so what were some of your favorite characters growing up? Like, what are some of the characters you would either love to get your hands on, or characters that you just have always loved and it's exciting for you to be sort of like playing in their world?
I really hope to do something with Steel someday, and Storm. X-Men fans are a little wild, So I got to make sure I nail the landing if I ever get the call.
Whenever you mention Steele, is this the John Henry or is this the Natasha? Because I'm a big Natasha fan, so I'm curious.
No, I love Natasha, but it's John Henry for me. I have some ideas about Natasha for sure, but John Henry's the one I grew up with in just the animated series, the Death of Superman arc, all that stuff.
Yeah, I could see Natasha playing pretty well with Jaime, just throwing it out there. So tell me a little bit about sort of like what it was like whenever you first got into comics. Like, what was that like whenever you first got your first character and you started to write down your first script? Like, what was that like for you?
I've been doing my own comics as long as I can remember, but I'm only, getting the opportunity to do it on a professional level is a whole different ballgame, right? So like when you get that like opportunity to pitch, I just got overwhelmed with the excitement, and I overdid it. Your pitch for a 2-page comic is 4 pages, right? Stuff like that. And so even though my first pitches kind of went nowhere, I still learned kind of the ins and outs, and like I threw some tantrums for sure internally, but cooler heads prevail. Honestly, I tell people if you want to work in the industry, you have to be patient, and you have to be kind, and you have to be persistent. And it's not, like I said, it's not a quick game to break into comics.
Yeah. So you mentioned whenever you started to break in, you followed a lot of creators on Twitter. Who were the creators for you that felt like were your sort of like pathway in? Like, first of all, some of your favorites, but then also like people that sort of helped you to find your way in.
Yeah, like the ones that I was reading the most, I kind of got like Mark Waid's Kingdom Come was a big deal for me. That was kind of my entry point into superhero DC comics. Kingdom Come was super cool for me. And then I love all of Gail Simone's stuff. The Birds of Prey run that she did was like really important for me, because like this all-female team of just like badasses and super spies and warriors, and like that felt fresh to me. And then of course the X-Men comics, what the Jim Lee stuff is baked into my brain. I'm a 90s kid, so you can't escape it. But like Greg Rucka and Brubaker, those really big creators that I kind of like gravitated towards their work when I started to afford to buy comics. I didn't have any money as a kid. We were pretty broke, so going to the comic shop was like a big deal. So like once I had my own money, like going to the comic shop became like an addiction. So I'd say those, and then also like just to go back to like Sunday or the newspaper strip from The Far Side, or Bill Watterson from Calvin and Hobbes. These were all like very formative creators for me. But for the ones that kind of got me through the door, I owe a lot of that to editors at Archaea Comics. They're now part of Boom. They're an imprint within Boom Studios. But Rebecca Taylor was a senior editor at Boom or at Archaea, and she gave me a lot of opportunities. She went over to DC and edited books there for a number of years, and that's kind of my in. And then just like small favors, I guess, acts of kindness from various creators and artists. That's the hardest thing, I think, as a writer, is finding an artist who will take a chance on you when you don't have any established work. And it's like, I didn't have very much money, so I was saving up like every paycheck, I would save enough money to pay an artist for 1 page, and I got paid every other week. So it took about over a year for me to have enough. Then I had to pay for printing. Then I had to pay for the second printing because I messed up the first printing, and just on and on and on. And so it just like all the people who were willing to work with me, all the people who were willing to look at my work or like talk to me at conventions, like they probably weren't impressed by what I was doing or by the work I was doing, but hopefully they were impressed by the effort I was putting into it. And so I really try to extend that kindness to a lot of up and coming creators.
Yeah, to hear you talk about paying for collaborators and things makes me feel very seen, because I'm a self-published author, so I'm having to pay like editors and cover designers and all those things right now. And it is one of those things where like you need the quality to be able to break into the industry, for people to notice you and to have good work. But also like it's hard to work a full-time job and then pay for life, but then also pay for your art. Like it's a real struggle.
I decided if I don't pursue it seriously now, I'm going to have like a midlife crisis in 10 years. And so it was now or never for me.
Yeah, that feels very similar for me. Like I feel like it's a long game, right? Like I feel like like my book came out 2 weeks ago, so like this is all very very new for me. But
Congratulations.
I feel like it's one of those things where I know that if I start now, like it's something that I don't expect to be an overnight success. So like it's gonna take a while, but like I have to start somewhere. So like if I don't start
Yeah.
now, then when?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, there's a lot of people I notice on like social media, they'll put like, I'm an aspiring writer, I'm an aspiring artist. And like, if you're writing, you're a writer. If you're an artist, you're an artist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no like, I guess you could be like aspiring to be professional, but like, you're doing it. Like, own it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of criticism of self-published authors that they say like, because a ton of professional authors will say things like, I'm so glad I didn't publish my first book because it was so bad. But like, you hear people like Neil Gaiman, Stephen King say that. I would love to read Neil Gaiman's first unpublished novel. You know what I mean? Like, even if he thinks it's bad, I'd probably love it.
No, that's so true. And like, someday someone might dig up my first works and be like, oh God. But maybe there's a little spark there that, someone saw, and that's kind of why they were able to take chances on me.
Yeah, and like you have to get your name out there, right? Period. Like that's the truth of it.
Yeah, so much of this is being kind of visible to editors.
Yeah, so what's some good advice that you got from other creators? You mentioned listening to podcasts. I'm guessing you probably also talked to a number of creators at cons and things. Did you have any good advice that stuck with you before you broke into the industry?
I definitely lean on the patience, kindness, and persistence. But I will say that the best advice I ever heard was Brian Michael Bendis, who wrote Ultimate Spider-Man and all sorts of other big books. He wasn't wrong. It took about 10 years for me to get my first paycheck in comics. So, that just shows the kind of like effort you have to put in, and like the thankless effort. It feels like you're getting nowhere, but you're developing your skills and you're learning to better present yourself to potential audiences or editors or artists or whatever.
Yeah, as much as people like us hate doing this sort of promotional thing, I don't know about you. I don't hate it. I actually kind of thrive in this sort of environment. But I think that the more you do it, the better you get at it. So like, even if you don't think you're good at it, you just have to keep doing it to get good at it,
Yeah, it's definitely a muscle. Chuck Jones, the animator, he said that every artist has 1 million bad drawings in them, so it's just better to get them out of the way now. And I totally agree. Like every writer has 1 million bad pages, and you just gotta work through it.
Yeah, and like, what's so bad if people see those? Because if you're gonna get better, like that growth is still worth showing.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about like writing. Whenever you got the first character that you were like, oh wow, this is so exciting. Like, what's the one that jumps into your head whenever I say that?
Oh gosh. Let's see. Who did I get to write first? I mean, the Adventure Time characters were like the first big known characters. Adventure Time kind of has like a lot of my sensibilities. It kind of has a non sequitur form of humor. It's very colorful and like childish, but also very adult and dark at times. And there's a lot of queer themes running throughout it. So I felt very much at home writing those characters. I would be writing Adventure Time graphic novels every month if that was still a thing. But that was really thrilling to me, and also like it lent me a lot of legitimacy. I think early on in my career, from those books, I was able to pitch original work, and I did my Dodge City comic, which in a very circuitous way led to me doing Blue Beetle about 5 years later.
Yes, let's talk a little bit about Washington's Gay General, because that's nonfiction, right? What was that like to do that? How is that different than what you've been doing?
So Levi and I worked on a short comic called Declaration that was kind of like a Revolutionary War gay romance. And it got some traction. We had fun at conventions selling it, and people seemed to really dig it. And they would say to us, oh, you should do a book about Baron von Steuben. And we're like, that sounds great. Who's Baron von Steuben? And so the elevator pitch, he dressed kind of fabulously. He was a very stern man with fancy tastes. And there's a lot of speculation, and I would argue fact, that he was in a relationship with younger men. Some of the troops he commanded. He had a lot of lovers throughout his life, it seems. but obviously that kind of history is hidden from us or omitted from the history books. We did a short comic about him, and it blew up beyond our expectations. We did it for the nib.com, and it went viral in a way that nothing I'd ever done had. And so we were able to get the book deal from that, and now it's been 5 years, and I think now we have a real chunky book that's a full biography of his life. But I guess to get to the original question, the difference is like, oh, we want you to write Incredible Hulk. Well, you have to, you might have to read 100 issues of Incredible Hulk. And then you want to write a book about von Steuben, you have to read every piece of material you can find about this man's life, because you want to support your own theories and conclusions about who he was. Because it is like, you are painting a picture of this person's life. Really dig into in the book too is kind of these questions of like, how can we identify someone who lived so long ago with our modern labels of sexuality and gender and romance and love and all these things. So like, it's an ongoing conversation that I hope we're kind of sparking.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, I can tell you as a comic book fan, I appreciate like the visibility that you've given to this historical figure that probably didn't get his due in his time, especially for the things that we appreciate about him as queer people. But also I appreciate as a comic book fan that you feel the responsibility to do research on established characters, because there's nothing that I hate more than reading a character for 12 issues until a new creator comes on who then ignores everything that just happened the past 12 months for that character.
It's so tricky, right? Because you want to make the books accessible to new readers, but you don't want to write over or erase or undo anything that came before. And that's harder to do for a character like, I haven't written the Incredible Hulk, but I'm just going to keep using them as an example. The Hulk has had like 900 issues or something insane, right? And so like, you're going to repeat 20 years ago, like the same kind of beats. It's through my interpretation. And there's a reason that we keep coming back to these themes with these characters. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a coincidence that we're all writing the same kind of stories about the Hulk. It's because there's something intrinsic or iconic about these characters. And I like the idea that we're kind of having a conversation with them as the times change too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool things about comics, especially like these characters that have been around for decades, is we get to see how their sort of like central thesis statement, which a lot of these characters have, how it applies in a modern context. I think that's very cool to kind of see.
Yeah, with Blue Beetle, he's been around for 15 years. He's been in a couple hundred comics at this point, but it's nothing compared to some of these more established characters. And so the real trick was, how do we make a story for people who are going to come in, hopefully after the movie debuts, and want to learn more about the character? And how do we satisfy the long-term fans as well? But for graduation day, at least, our goal was to like make something kind of fun and upbeat and exciting, and kind of introduce people to the character again, but also to people who don't read DC books, reintroduce them to the fun of the DC universe.
Yeah, I think that's so exciting. And as a longtime Jaime fan, I'm excited to see new readers come in and see how they can respond to him. Like, truly, I never expected to see a movie of his, like for him to have him. I expected to maybe see him in an animated series or two, and then never again in mainstream anything. Just because I'm so used to, as a Birch many times obscure character fan, I didn't expect to see him in a lot of things. So it's very cool for me. And I'm sure it's very cool for you also as the writer to see him on the big screen.
Oh, it's incredible. As a fan, it's wild. And then as a creator, it's like doubly so. Just like the idea that I'm tapping into something that's so important to so many people who, anecdotally, I know a lot of the people who read Blue Beetle don't read a lot of other DC books. They came in specifically because of the character, because of his heritage. And I know that, Blue Beetle is published in Spanish and English. It's the only book that DC publishes like that right now. And so the people who read it in Spanish, they've never read a DC comic before. You know what I mean? Like, this is a book that's really bringing people to this universe in a way that other titles don't necessarily do.
And also such an interesting inclusion argument too, of like, why aren't there other DC comics that are published in Spanish,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not making the big decisions. It makes perfect sense for Jaime. But I'd love to see just Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. I'd love to see the big A-list characters get published in both languages as well.
Well, Justice League at least, right? Like the
Yeah,
flagship
absolutely.
titles. The thing that drew me to you initially was that you sometimes tweet about Bunker, the DC character that was in Teen Titans, introduced in the New 52 by
Yeah.
Scott Lobdell. Um, I love him. I've loved him for a long time. And I feel like he doesn't get a lot of love. And you're literally the only other person I've ever seen mention him, period. So I'd love to chat a little bit about like what with you. Obvious, I feel like there's probably things that are obvious about why he resonated with you, but like what are the things that for you that stuck out about him?
You know, Bunker is a character that I kind of fell in love with. I talked to my friend Josh Trujillo, and we did a book called Pool Boys together. But it's vibes. Bunker just has good vibes. You know, he's a gay Latino with what I call Fortnite powers. He makes energy bricks. He makes energy constructs. So like, I get the like why there isn't a Bunker solo movie or something right now, but I just like his optimism. He's one of these queer characters that are kind of free of baggage, which I find very interesting. And he's Latino, but he's not Mexican American, he's Mexican. And that kind of puts him in a unique space as along with these other international heroes like Dynastus, who is in Blue Beetle now. I really think there's a lot of potential to explore his powers more too. So, I mean, that's kind of what drew me to him. I think he's a great utility player, a great team member, and I want to see him shine a little bit. I'm doing a Bunker short for DC's holiday special. It's it's my love letter to the character, and
I feel
hopefully
like you have
setting him
no
up
idea
for
how much
future adventures.
that means to me, how exciting that is. I mean, you might have some idea as a fellow Bunker fan, but but no, I'm so excited to read more Bunker in any form whatsoever. So the thing that I love about him is I remember whenever he debuted, Scott Lobdell got a lot of crap because he came off as pretty stereotypical the way that he wrote him initially. And
Mhm.
Scott Lobdell had this quote that was like, stereotypes exist for a reason. Like there are gay people like this that exist. And that sort of resonated with me as somebody that knows those stereotypical gay people, like I feel like at a certain point we tried to like sanitize queer people to make them not stereotypical in a way that made them no longer part of queer culture. They just sort of came off as straight characters who happen to date people of the same sex. And I appreciated that Bunker wasn't that. Granted, Scott Lobdell may not have been the person to make this argument,
Correct.
but I am excited to see somebody like you write it who is the person to make that argument.
I'm very grateful that Bunker was created, obviously, and it was a big thrill to pitch a Bunker short and for DC to say, yeah, like we're ready to take a risk on this character. To your point, it's cyclical or it's evolving, it's moving very quickly, kind of our take on queer characters and what is stereotypical, what is not. I think of Steve Fox's character, Webweaver, the gay Spider-Verse character, very much like a party gay in times. I mean this with love, but like if Webweaver came out, oh gosh, even 5 years ago, I think people would have been offended. I think the gay community would have been like, that's not, you're just promoting a stereotype. Whereas Webweaver reflects the diversity of the queer community. We have kind of more, maybe tougher characters like my Aaron Fisher character, the gay Captain America, who has more of an edge to him. When there's only one queer character, they have all the weight of the world on them, right? And all these expectations.
Yeah, and I did think there's something to be said for like we need to have characters that represent the whole of the spectrum and are also reflective of like the broader culture, right? Like I remember Cena Grace got a ton of flack for his Iceman book, which I thought was great, but I like the fact that he had like drag queens in it and things like got a lot of like they were like saying you're pushing this agenda. He's too gay now, and it's like he can be gay, like he is gay.
Yeah, we need to reflect the world we live in. Like I guess I was saying earlier, but like queer culture should be a part of queer stories, right? They shouldn't just go to Denny's for dinner. You know what I mean? Like they would go to it's just natural for these characters to go to the drag show or go out to a club or go to a parade or like, go see their favorite queer artists and like rock out.
Yeah, and I mean people think it's cool when someone like, I don't know, Dick Grayson goes to a rock show, but then, if Guy Span goes to a drag show, it's a bridge too far for some reason.
Yeah, I did a Apollo and Midnighter short where I introduced some DC hero drag queens. I had a lot of fun coming up with those names. So I'm just continuing the grand tradition of comic drag. Although all superheroes are drag. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's world living in a world where drag race is such a big part of like mainstream culture. Honestly,
mhm.
it's so strange that people think that they shouldn't be in comics. You know. So, what are some other obscure characters? Like, what are some of your other favorites that we may not think of? Like, who are some characters that pop into your head that you're like, this person needs a lot more love than they get?
Oh gosh, I'm really hoping to dig up some of my favorite characters. In Blue Beetle Graduation Day, we feature Black Condor, who is a member of the Freedom Fighters. I love Black Condor. I like less visible legacy characters. Like I love Jessica Cruz, for example, someone who doesn't necessarily get the spotlight as much as she should. I like, I like random ones too. I like Crazy Quilt, the villain. I like the ventriloquist. I like Space Cabbie. I like the weird, colorful world of DC.
Yeah, I feel like we are of a similar generation in that I think that we both grew up reading, maybe not grew up, but we were like young adults at the time that DC was doing this initiative, like New 52 era, where they were like introducing a lot of new characters, like a lot of new diverse legacy characters that have
Mhm.
kind of like, it's kind of like a lost generation of heroes now. You know, like a lot of heroes that have kind of like fallen by the wayside. So like that's why I'm so excited that Blue Beetle is getting another ongoing book, because like I've been reading him since 52. I think he was introduced in, you know,
Yeah, he came
and
out of Infinite Crisis.
yeah. So I've been a big fan of his for a long time, but it seems like for the longest time DC just didn't know what to do with these characters, you know, and I think it's interesting to have been the generation that they pushed these characters so hard on, to have then seen them like not necessarily disappear, but like slowly like fade into the background, you know?
Just a lot of characters that haven't gotten their due recently. Like there's a Cyborg series, there's a Hawk Girl series, there's a Fire and Ice series, and like this would be unthinkable a few years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so DC's willing to like take a risk on their second, not to dismiss any of the like their second tier heroes and like try to elevate them to the A list. And I think that's so cool. You don't necessarily see every publisher trying to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's cool to see them sort of go back and pick these characters up, because you know, like when you think about whenever Marvel did a similar thing, like they were characters like, you know, Kamala and Miles, and like those characters are still like pretty prominent. Like they've really not gone anywhere, you know?
Oh, sure. Yeah, some of them stick, right? Like, but some of them kind of peter off a little bit. And that's comics. It's a cycle. It's almost like the characters that someone's going to read my Blue Beetle run and like hopefully love my new characters. It's a fun playground and I'm happy to leave a mark on it. But you have to understand too that it's a sandbox. So the wind blows and your work gets undone. And then later someone will use that sand to make something else.
Well, and I think it's a diversity argument for the creators, right? Because I think that it's a fair assessment to say that like a lot of these characters were introduced whenever like they knew that diversity was like important, but they didn't bother to do
Mm-hmm.
anything behind the scenes to like make that reflective of these characters. So I think that like when it comes to when you think about playing in the sandbox, like whenever the people playing in the sandbox all look the same, it's hard for them to like they're less likely to pick up the toys that don't look like them, right? So I think that we're at a place now where a lot of these creators, a lot of the writers, artists are more diverse, and that's why we're getting to see a lot more of these characters that they previously didn't come up. You know?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think we've gotten the most diverse group of creators doing mainstream comics that we have ever. And hopefully that keeps up.
Yeah. So just sort of a little bit of like background. Like you don't have to name names, you don't have to say like specifics, but like what are some of the like themes, trends that you're seeing happening right now, like in the background that you're excited about? Like what are some sort of like in anything that kind of like sparks interest in your head, like in comics in the industry right now that you're
Oh gosh, I've done a couple of these for Marvel, these Marvel Unlimited comics that are kind of modeled after like the Webtoons format or Tapas, that kind of like infinite scroll. And so that's really exciting for me because you get to focus on characters that may not get their due in print. And so like, I'm thinking of Trungles did a really beautiful story about Karma, the X-Men character. And that's a character that would never get a solo book ever. And like, but they can be a star for a storyline in Marvel Unlimited. So I'm hoping that kind of creates opportunities for creators to break into the industry, and then also to kind of like celebrate some of these characters that just like, these books are only 22 pages a month. You just don't have time for everyone.
Yeah, so I'm curious from your perspective how you feel about like backup features. Like I always, to some extent, love them because it gives another character a chance to shine, but also it takes up pages. So I'm wondering how you balance that as a creator. Like, how do you feel about it?
I mean, I got a lot of opportunities doing some backup stories, so I'm totally in favor of them. I don't mind losing my pages if it means we get more story overall. I'd love for Blue Beetle to have a backup written by another creator. Maybe they focus on the new Beatles or Starfire or Ted Cord or something like that. Like that's all cool to me. Yeah, I wish the comics weren't as limited to the page count that they are.
Yeah, it's sort of a unique industry in that the standard for the page count is pretty universal, right? Like I remember looking into this a while ago, like 22 pages is like how long a comic is. Like it basically, and like obviously there are some exceptions. There's the special issues. There's like seasonal things, but generally speaking, like any miniseries tends to be 22 pages. Do you feel like that's like limiting, or do you feel like it's sort of empowering that you know exactly what it will be every time?
Right. So like learning to write for that many pages, I got my start doing like, I don't know, a 2-page backup, a 4-page backup, an 8-page back. You get better at pacing it. And so like I feel like I overstuff my comics a little bit because I want to tell more story, right? And so that's always the push and pull of it, is like, how do you tell this compelling a full arc for these characters in the amount of time you're given?
Yeah, I'm a big Scott Snyder fan, so I'm always loved like the long soliloquy at the beginning by the character that where they wax poetically about like the city they live in or the villain that they're facing that day or whatever. And I feel like those really long speeches that it may feel like it slows it down or whatever, I feel like it does give you more story. Like it packs it a little bit tighter, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's totally true. And also I would say it's like a visual medium. So like I don't want to take inches away from the art if I can help it. So it's a total balancing act.
How do you feel like you have done that with like Blue Beetle? Like, how do you feel like? Do you have conversations often with your artists? Do you feel like you write the script and then the art sort of comes afterwards? Like, how does that?
Yeah, my collaborator on that, Adrian Gutierrez, super talented guy, a total sweetheart, and my blue brother. I love Adrian, and we have a lot of conversations kind of at the beginning of these arcs, the beginning of each issue of what we want, because I want to, I have a vision for the stories I want to tell, but they don't mean anything unless the artist is excited to draw it. And so like it's a totally collaborative medium. And so like I work in video games too. That's collaborative, but on a scale of like hundreds of people touch the game. In a comic, it's me, the artist, the colorist, the letterer, the editor, and that's about it. You know what I mean? There's like less than a dozen people before this like awesome issue exists and is brought into the world.
And it's a weird thing. I'm a story guy, right? So like obviously I'm a big fan of writers, and I'm a writer, so I'm a big fan of writers for that reason as well. But I always like know the names of the writers. I sometimes will know the names of the artists if they really jump out at me. But it is one of those things where like as long as the art is good, I don't tend to notice it. But if the art is bad, I really notice it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it is one of those things where it is a bit of a push and pull. Like as somebody who's also a fan, like do you think about that?
Oh, I think about it all the time. On some level, you need to write towards the strengths of the artists. You know what I mean? Like, I have a friend. I have a friend who's doing a comic, and he like wrote a scene set in a mall, and then the pages came in, and then it doesn't look that great. And he's like, I don't know what to do. Maybe I need to have him redraw it. And I'm like, you made him like he doesn't want to draw malls. You know what I mean? You should talk to him about that.
Yeah, that's easy to think about because like whenever I design covers, I often will get backgrounds that I'm like, that's really busy. I don't know if I love that, and it is something you have to think about, like because you want the character to shine, but you don't want the background to be distracting. So
yeah,
but you don't want to always have your like action and open field, right? As a comic book writer.
No, you need cool backgrounds and cool visuals and like, but also you can't. Alan Moore has these incredibly detailed scripts, and every page is just dripping with meaning and odds and ends, and he'll do one book every 5 years or something like that. You know what I mean? And so we have to be very thoughtful about how we deploy our artists.
Yeah, and part of me feels like the answer to that might be giving the artist a bit more freedom, right? Like your descriptions are specific enough to convey what you want to happen, but like broad enough that they can interpret it with their own artistic vision. Like I said, with my cover artist, it was one of the most collaborative things I've done in this process as an author. And I think that the best part of it was sort of like letting him come back to me with things that was better than what I could have imagined.
Spread of one of my favorite DC characters for Blue Beetle, and it is the most stunning. He elevated his craft far and away for these double page spreads, and some of the strength of that, I think, is by not giving him clear, super specific direction on how to draw it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting too with a character like Blue Beetle because like you said, he's been around for 15 years. We sort of have an idea of what he looks like, so I'm sure that's absolutely incredible to see him envisioned in a way that you would have never imagined in your own head.
Oh, absolutely. And a big motivation, theme, whatever, that I want for these books is I want to introduce Jaime. The next issue, it could be witches, and the next issue could be cute animals. You know what I mean? Like thankfully I have a very versatile partner in Adrienne in that way. And so, it's always a trick, right? And he always finds ways to surprise me.
Yeah, I'm gonna have you repeat your goal just because I missed it and I want to make sure I get it. Your goal is always introduce.
I want to see parts of the DC universe that he's never interacted with before. I want to see new characters. I want to create new dynamics, because I think that's where he's served best, is being kind of this wide-eyed. He stands in for the audience in some level, the reader, to explore the DC universe and to react to it. And so one issue might be dinosaurs, the next issue might be robots, the next issue might be cute animals or a soap opera.
Yeah, so as a comic book fan, and since I have a comic book writer here, I feel like I wanted to get a little bit of inside baseball here. And I'm just so curious now. When you want to work with other characters, like with what you're talking about, you want to have characters from other parts of the DC universe. Is there things you have to be aware of? Are there editors you have to talk to in other departments to make sure you can work with them? What has that experience been like?
In Palmyra City, which is a new city in the DC universe that a lot of other characters haven't inhabited yet. And so we have our little pocket that we can build out our world, which is great. And so when we want to bring in Superman, it's relative, he's, as long as he's not as long as he didn't lose his powers or get trapped in space or whatever, it's pretty flexible on that front. But with more specific characters, there can be sometimes a little bit of a back, and I kind of had to really make a case for why I wanted to use this character. And it's not that someone else was using him, but they're just a resistance to pull some of these guys out of mothballs, where I think that's let's give them a chance to shine. Maybe this will lead to something.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some element of why would this, does it make sense for this character to be with him, right? Because while I would love to see Jaime go on an adventure with Harley Quinn, why is she in Palmyra City?
It's one. I don't want to overstuff the book with A-listers because it's not the story I want to tell.
Yeah.
Jaime's the A-lister.
Thank you for saying that as a longtime Blue Beetle fan. So I'd love to hear anything you want to promote. So this will be coming out in November. So anything that you'd want to throw out there that you think would be relevant, feel free to talk about it now. I'd love for people to know how to, I always ask people how to find you, but you're on comic book shelves. So that's how they find you. What should they be looking for?
And online, you can pick that up. It's from Abrams and Shirley Press is the imprint. And hopefully we have a lot more coming in that regard. But beyond that, Blue Beetle issue number 3 will hit stores in November. So you can look for that. We have the return of Tracy 13 to the Blue Beetle universe. She was his magical ex.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a pleasure. I've enjoyed talking about this stuff, despite internet issues on my end.
No, it's perfectly fine.
But I'm I really enjoyed talking to you, and also like thank you so much for like championing these characters, because like I think it's so important. First of all, for like diverse characters to get their due, and especially for like these queer characters like your Captain America to get some spotlight, so that we can see all of our world in these books. Because I feel like comics should be for everyone, and I think that it's people like you that are really making that possible.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And and pick up the Bunker comic when it comes out. Twas the Bat Night before Christmas. I think it comes out in December. So it's a good one.
Well, you know that I am. So, well, thank you so much again. This has been great. I really look forward. We should talk again soon. Hello. Most Writers Are Fans is a Starlight King production. Special thanks to our guest, Josh Trujillo. If you'd like to support the podcast, rate and review it. Also, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to send a message or record a voice message, please visit the Spotify page for this show. Links for this and all additional information about Terry Bartley can be found on terrybartley.com. You can also email us at contact@starlightkingpress.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be afraid to tell your story.